Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell sat quietly in the briefing room, her hands folded on her lap. No one paid her much attention. She was the backup pilot, the one who always trained hard but never flew the lead mission. Her colleagues barely noticed her presence. Some saw her as cautious, others as simply the second choice. But Sarah was ready. Every moment of every day, she prepared herself for something bigger, something that might never come. Yet deep inside, she believed that when her time arrived, she would be more than just a backup. The squadron commander entered, his face serious. "Listen up," he said. "We have a critical mission today. A supply convoy is moving through hostile territory. Intelligence reports increased enemy activity. The convoy needs air cover to get through safely." The room fell silent. "Captain Reynolds will lead the escort. Lieutenant Mitchell, you will be backup." Sarah's heart beat faster. The word backup felt like a familiar weight. She nodded quietly, but inside, a spark ignited. As the team prepared, Sarah went through every checklist, every protocol, every simulation she had drilled 1,000 times before. The hum of engines warmed up in the hangar below. Pilots exchanged confident smiles and jokes, but Sarah kept her focus sharp. She didn't need applause. She needed the mission to succeed. Once airborne, the sky was calm and clear. The convoy moved slowly beneath them, trucks crawling along the rugged dirt road. Sarah watched the landscape carefully, the rolling hills, the scattered trees, the shadows that might hide danger. The radio crackled softly, the squadron communicating in calm, clipped tones. She studied Captain Reynolds as he took the lead with practiced ease, confident in his command. Minutes passed, each one heavier than the last. Sarah's mind raced with every possible scenario, every danger they might face. Then suddenly, the silence was broken by a sharp report, the distant crack of gunfire. At first, it seemed faint, almost like thunder far away. But it grew louder, closer, more urgent. Captain Reynolds called out, "Enemy fire confirmed. Stay sharp." The convoy was under attack. The enemy had sprung a trap. Sarah's pulse quickened, but her face remained steady. She was no longer just a shadow in the squadron. The moment she had trained for was here. Smoke began to rise from the convoy below, black and angry against the blue sky. Explosions rocked the trucks. The enemy was closing in fast. Captain Reynolds veered sharply, trying to intercept the attackers. The squadron split, pilots moving to engage the enemy fighters that appeared on radar. Sarah stayed back for now, scanning the sky with sharp eyes. She heard Captain Reynolds' voice over the radio, strained but steady, giving orders and fighting for control. Then came the crackle that made her stomach tighten. His plane had taken a hit. The sounds on the radio became fragmented, his words slower and harder to understand. The squadron hesitated. Confusion rippled through the pilots. The convoy was vulnerable. The enemy fighters pressed their advantage. Sarah knew hesitation could mean disaster. Her training kicked in. She tightened her grip on the controls. Her voice over the radio was calm but firm. "This is Lieutenant Mitchell," she said. "I'm taking command. Follow my lead." There was a pause. Then the other pilots responded, steadying themselves. Sarah's mind raced, but her hands were steady. She recalled every flight drill, every emergency procedure. With careful precision, Sarah maneuvered her plane to cover the convoy's most exposed trucks. She guided the squadron to form a protective shield, weaving through enemy fire. Her focus was absolute. She didn't think about fear or doubt, only about keeping the convoy safe and the pilots coordinated. Minutes felt like hours as the battle raged overhead. Sarah's voice remained a steady anchor on the radio, directing the squadron through the chaos. Enemy fighters broke off their attacks one by one, confused by her sharp tactics and unyielding presence. Finally, the sky began to clear. The convoy was still moving. The danger was fading. Sarah allowed herself a brief breath, knowing the fight was far from over, but confident they had survived the worst. Her hands shook slightly, but her resolve was stronger than ever. Back on base later, the squadron gathered quietly. No one said much at first, but the respect in their eyes spoke volumes. The backup pilot had stepped forward, turned the tide, and saved lives. And in that moment, Sarah knew she was no longer invisible. She was a leader. The squadron returned to base with the weight of the mission still hanging heavy in the air. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell sat quietly, her mind replaying every moment from the ambush. The hum of the debriefing room was filled with low voices and the rustle of papers. Captain Reynolds, though shaken and recovering from the ordeal, was the first to speak. "That was one of the toughest missions I've ever flown," he said, looking at Sarah with a new respect. "Without your quick thinking, it might have ended much worse." Sarah nodded, but kept her expression calm. She had always believed actions spoke louder than words. For years she'd been the backup, the pilot who followed orders, never led the charge. But today, she had proven she was ready. As the officers discussed the next steps, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the convoy. She wondered about the men and women on the ground, their lives depending on the supplies she helped protect. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah found herself walking alone near the hangar. The planes rested silently, their metal bodies catching the fading light. She thought about how close everything had come to disaster. The ambush had been brutal and unexpected, a reminder that danger was always lurking, even when skies seemed calm. Her mind wandered back to the briefing room that morning. The commander's words had been clear and urgent, but no one anticipated the enemy's ferocity. The convoy route was critical, carrying fuel, food, and medical supplies to troops stationed in a remote, hostile area. Losing it could have jeopardized months of hard-fought progress. The next day, Sarah attended a meeting with the squadron leaders. They analyzed the ambush from every angle, how the enemy had hidden in the hills, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The discussion was technical and intense, but Sarah listened carefully. She was determined to learn everything she could, to make sure the squadron would never be caught off guard again. Despite the praise she received, Sarah knew that leadership was more than just bravery in a single moment. It was about preparation, strategy, and the trust of those who followed her. She spent hours reviewing flight plans, studying maps of the region, and running simulations with the other pilots. Every detail mattered. Her fellow pilots, some of whom had been skeptical, began to see her differently. They asked questions about her tactics during the ambush, eager to understand how she had made split-second decisions under pressure. Sarah shared what she could, always emphasizing teamwork and communication as the keys to survival. One afternoon, Captain Reynolds approached her in the hangar. "You saved more than just the convoy," he said quietly. "You saved us all. I'm glad you were there." Sarah felt a warmth she hadn't expected, a quiet confirmation that she belonged. But the road ahead was still uncertain. Intelligence reports warned that the enemy was regrouping, preparing for another strike. The squadron had to stay vigilant. Sarah was no longer just a backup pilot. She was becoming a leader, one who carried the weight of responsibility with steady hands and a clear mind. As the days passed, Sarah's confidence grew. She began leading training exercises, simulating ambushes and emergency responses. Her calm under pressure inspired others, and the squadron's cohesion improved. Yet she never forgot the harsh reality of war, that every mission carried risk, and every life mattered. At night, when the base was quiet, Sarah often stared at the stars, thinking about the convoy, the pilots, and the soldiers depending on them. She knew this was just the beginning of a long journey. But for the first time, she felt truly ready to face whatever lay ahead. The morning air was crisp as the squadron prepared to take off once more. Sarah stood by her jet, the cold metal beneath her fingertips grounding her in the moment. The events of the previous mission were still fresh in everyone's minds. No one spoke openly about fear, but it hung in the silence between orders. This time, the mission was clear: escort another convoy through the same dangerous territory. The enemy was expected to be waiting. As engines roared to life, Sarah felt the familiar mix of adrenaline and calm focus settle over her. The squadron took to the sky, slicing through layers of clouds. Below them, the convoy crawled steadily along the rugged road. The landscape stretched out in endless browns and greens, hills dotted with sparse trees and rocky outcrops. The quiet beauty of the land was a stark contrast to the danger lurking just out of sight. Radio chatter filled the cockpit with updates and warnings. Sarah kept her eyes scanning, not just on the convoy, but on the horizon where enemy fighters might appear. Every minute felt like a test of nerves and skill. The pilots flew in tight formation, each trusting the others to watch their backs. The memory of last time's ambush sharpened their focus. Suddenly, without warning, a shadow flickered against the hills. A missile streaked through the air, narrowly missing one of the trucks. The enemy was here, just as predicted. The convoy's pace quickened, but the road was narrow and winding, a perfect trap. The squadron broke formation, pilots moving to intercept. Sarah's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. All pilots, engage. Protect the convoy at all costs. She weaved her plane expertly, dodging incoming fire. The sky erupted with the sounds of battle, engines screaming, bullets whizzing past, and radio crackling with urgent commands. Enemy fighters came from multiple directions, attempting to overwhelm the escort. Sarah spotted one closing in fast on the convoy's rear. With precise timing, she banked sharply and fired a warning burst that forced the attacker to break away. The convoy was still exposed, but every second Sarah kept the enemy at bay was a victory. Amid the chaos, she heard Captain Reynolds' voice on the radio, steadier than before. "Good work, Mitchell. Keep it up." Those words steadied her. The pilots moved like a single unit, coordinated and relentless. Sarah's training, her countless hours preparing for this moment, guided her every move. The enemy was relentless, but Sarah's tactics began to shift the tide. She directed her squadron to form a tighter perimeter around the convoy. Using the hills and terrain to their advantage, they forced the enemy fighters into vulnerable positions. One by one, the attackers were pushed back. Yet the battle was far from over. A sudden burst of fire hit one of the convoy's trucks, igniting a small blaze. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Lives depended on her now more than ever. She radioed for emergency support to be on standby once the convoy was safe. Time slowed in those critical moments. Sarah's focus narrowed to the essentials: protect the convoy, keep the squadron intact, survive the attack. Every pilot responded with precision. Together, they created a shield of steel and firepower that pushed the enemy away. After what felt like hours, but was only minutes, the last enemy fighter retreated beyond the horizon. The convoy was battered but intact, moving again toward safety. Sarah's breath came heavy but steady. The sky cleared. The mission was a success. Back at base, the mood was different this time. There were no doubts, no second-guessing. The squadron had faced the enemy and won, because of their training, their trust, and Sarah's calm command in the storm. As she climbed out of her jet, Sarah looked around at her fellow pilots. There was a new respect in their eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that the backup pilot was now a vital leader. For Sarah, it was more than recognition. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she no longer waited in the shadows. She had earned her place in the skies. The sky had turned a dull gray as the squadron prepared for another mission, but beneath the clouds, tension gripped every pilot. The previous ambush had left its mark: the memories of explosions, the sharp cries over the radio, and the haunting image of Captain Reynolds' plane losing control. Today, they flew with that weight heavy on their shoulders. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell felt it too, but she pushed the doubt aside. She was ready. This mission would test everything she had learned. As the jets roared to life and lifted off, the squadron moved with practiced precision. Sarah scanned the horizon, every muscle tense, every sense alert. The convoy below crawled forward, vulnerable against the vast, hostile landscape. She knew the enemy had been regrouping, waiting for a moment to strike again. The calm before the storm was deceptive. Minutes into the flight, the radio buzzed with an urgent message. Enemy fighters had been detected moving quickly toward the convoy's route. The squadron tightened formation, bracing for the inevitable. Sarah's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. Prepare for engagement. Protect the convoy at all costs. Then, without warning, the sky erupted into chaos. Missiles tore through the air, explosions lighting up the clouds. The enemy struck harder and faster than before. Captain Reynolds was immediately targeted. Sarah's radio crackled with his strained voice. I'm hit. Controls failing. Get them out of here. Panic threatened to take hold across the squadron. The leader's plane was spiraling out of control. The convoy was exposed, and the enemy fighters pressed their attack relentlessly. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The mission was unraveling. Sarah's training took over. She gripped the controls tightly, forcing herself to stay calm. This is Lieutenant Mitchell, she said firmly over the radio. I'm taking command. Follow my lead. Her words were met with silence, then steady acknowledgement. She wasn't just backup anymore. With sharp precision, Sarah maneuvered her jet into position. She focused on shielding the convoy's most vulnerable points. Enemy fighters swarmed, their guns blazing, but Sarah stayed cool, weaving through the assault like a seasoned dancer. Every decision counted, every movement had to be flawless. The squadron rallied behind her, regaining order amidst the storm. Sarah directed them with clarity, her voice calm and commanding. Target the fighters on the left flank. Cover the rear trucks. Stay close and keep communication tight. The battle raged overhead, missiles flying, bullets streaking through the smoke-filled sky. Sarah's hands were steady despite the chaos. She felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. The lives of the convoy, the squadron, even Captain Reynolds, depended on her. Suddenly, one of the convoy trucks erupted in flames, sending a plume of thick black smoke into the sky. Sarah's stomach clenched. Emergency teams, prepare for immediate response, she ordered. Her mind raced, calculating the risks, searching for ways to buy the convoy time. Then came the worst moment. A missile locked onto her plane. The explosion rocked her, throwing her against the seat harness. Alarms blared. Sarah fought to regain control, pushing the jet to respond. Her training kicked in as she executed evasive maneuvers, narrowly escaping destruction. The squadron covered her retreat, creating a barrier between her and the enemy. The fight continued with brutal intensity. Sarah pushed herself harder, calling every move, every strategy she could remember. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Enemy fighters broke formation and retreated, unable to match her relentless defense. As the last of the attackers fled, the convoy, battered but alive, moved forward. The radio grew quiet except for the steady voice of Captain Reynolds. Good work, Lieutenant. You saved us all. Relief flooded through Sarah, but she knew the mission was far from over. When the squadron finally landed back at base, the air was heavy with exhaustion and unspoken respect. Sarah stepped from her jet, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. The pilots gathered around her, no longer seeing her as backup, but as the leader who had turned the tide in the deadliest ambush. That night, as she sat alone under the dim hangar lights, Sarah reflected on the day's battle. The fear, the chaos, the responsibility, it had all tested her limits. But she had not faltered. She had become the pilot they needed, the one who could face the storm and lead others through it. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed the intense ambush felt heavy with unspoken questions and cautious optimism. The squadron was quieter than usual, each pilot carrying the invisible scars of the fight. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted, a new respect, a new awareness of what they were truly capable of. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell felt it most keenly. The label of backup pilot was slipping away, replaced by something stronger: trust. Briefings became longer and more detailed. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture of the enemy's movements. They were regrouping, reorganizing, and preparing for another strike. The convoy route remained vital, and so did the mission. Sarah threw herself into every meeting, every strategy session, determined to ensure the squadron was ready. She studied maps and enemy tactics late into the night, knowing that preparation could mean the difference between life and death. Her fellow pilots began to seek her out more often, asking questions about her decisions during the ambush. Some were curious about her training. Others wanted advice on how she kept calm under pressure. Sarah answered openly, emphasizing the importance of teamwork and communication. Slowly, the walls of doubt that had surrounded her started to crumble. One afternoon, during a routine training exercise, Sarah led the squadron through a simulated ambush scenario. The pilots followed her lead with precision, trusting her commands implicitly. As they navigated through the mock battlefield, Sarah's voice was steady, guiding them through every maneuver. When the exercise ended successfully, there were nods and quiet congratulations. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. Later that day, Captain Reynolds approached Sarah with a serious look. "You've changed the way this squadron operates," he said. "Your leadership saved lives. You're no longer just a pilot. We're counting on you." Sarah felt a swell of pride, but stayed humble. She knew the mission was far from over. Despite the growing confidence, the threat remained real. The enemy's next move was unpredictable, and the stakes were higher than ever. Sarah spent hours analyzing satellite images, trying to anticipate where the next attack might come from. Her dedication was relentless. She wanted to be ready, not just for herself, but for every pilot and soldier depending on her. Then came the call. Intelligence had confirmed that the enemy was planning a major assault on a nearby base. The convoy would be rerouted through even more dangerous terrain. The squadron had to be ready to provide air support, and Sarah was once again assigned a leading role. As the day of the mission arrived, the tension was palpable. The pilots checked their gear meticulously. Sarah's hands were steady, but inside, a quiet determination burned bright. She knew this was her chance to prove that she was more than a backup. She was a leader forged by fire. The squadron took off into a sky heavy with clouds, the roar of the jets a reminder of what was at stake. Below, the convoy began its slow, perilous journey through rocky passes and narrow canyons. The enemy could strike at any moment. Sarah kept a sharp eye on the radar, scanning for threats. The hours dragged on, each one filled with silent anticipation. Then, without warning, the enemy launched their attack, faster, fiercer, and more coordinated than ever before. Explosions rocked the ground, and tracer rounds lit up the sky. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, steady and commanding. "All pilots, engage immediately. Protect the convoy. Watch your six." The squadron surged into action, a well-oiled machine, responding to the danger. Sarah darted through the enemy fighters with precision, her instincts honed by every battle before. She coordinated the squadron's movements, blocking attacks and shielding the convoy. The enemy was relentless, but Sarah's leadership was unwavering. The battle stretched on, the sky a blur of smoke, fire, and roaring engines. Sarah's focus never wavered. She called out targets, warned of threats, and kept her squadron in formation. The pilots responded with confidence, their trust in her growing with every maneuver. When the last enemy fighter broke away, the convoy was battered but still moving. The pilots exhaled collectively, relief washing over them. Sarah felt a deep sense of accomplishment, but she knew the fight was far from over. As the squadron returned to base, the mood was different this time. There was no doubt about who was leading them. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had become more than just a backup pilot. She was their guiding force, the woman who turned the tide when it mattered most. The base was quieter than usual after the mission. The pilots moved with a new sense of purpose, but also exhaustion. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell leaned against her jet, wiping the sweat from her brow. The battle had been brutal. Every pilot carried the weight of what they'd faced in the sky. Sarah felt it too, the long hours, the adrenaline, the responsibility. But she also felt something else, a quiet confidence growing inside her. She remembered the early days, when she was just the backup pilot, overlooked and underestimated. No one expected her to lead. No one expected her to make a difference. But now, after surviving 2 deadly ambushes and guiding the convoy to safety, everything had changed. The commanding officer called a meeting to discuss the enemy's next move. Intelligence suggested the enemy was desperate and willing to take bigger risks. Their tactics had evolved, more aggressive, more unpredictable. The convoy's route remained a critical supply line, and its protection was more vital than ever. Sarah sat at the table with the squadron leaders. Maps and satellite images spread out before them, detailing the rugged terrain where the enemy was most active. The discussions were intense, every detail scrutinized. Sarah spoke up, sharing insights she'd gathered from her experiences. Her ideas were sharp, practical, and grounded in real combat knowledge. Predicting their next strike is tricky, she said, but if we focus on their supply points and known staging areas, we can anticipate and intercept before they reach the convoy. Her words caught the attention of the room. The leaders nodded, impressed by her strategic thinking. Sarah knew that leading was more than flying well. It was about outthinking the enemy and keeping everyone one step ahead. After the meeting, Sarah returned to the hangar. She watched the pilots preparing for the next mission, their faces set with determination and a hint of anxiety. She approached Captain Reynolds, who was reviewing flight plans. "We're ready," she said simply. He looked up, respect clear in his eyes. "You've changed everything, Sarah. This squadron trusts you now." The next mission was set to be the most dangerous yet. The enemy was expected to launch a coordinated attack, combining airstrikes and ground assaults. Sarah was tasked with leading the escort team once more. The pressure was immense, but she welcomed it. As the squadron took off under a sky streaked with dark clouds, Sarah's focus sharpened. The convoy moved steadily below, a lifeline carrying fuel, ammunition, and food to soldiers far from home. Every second counted. The enemy appeared almost on cue, fighter jets speeding in from the hills, artillery fire echoing from the ground. The air erupted with chaos. Missiles streaked through the sky, bullets rattled against armor, and the convoy pushed forward despite the danger. Sarah took command with calm authority. "Engage on my mark. Protect the convoy's flanks and rear. Watch for ground fire." Her voice was steady, cutting through the chaos like a beacon. The squadron moved like a single unit, responding to every threat with precision. Sarah's hands flew over the controls, dodging fire, positioning her jet to shield the convoy. The battle was fierce. One of the trucks exploded in a fiery blast, sending a shockwave through the column. Sarah's stomach tightened, but she didn't falter. Suddenly, enemy fighters targeted Sarah's wingmen, trying to break the formation. Sarah reacted instantly, maneuvering to draw fire away and give her team a chance to regroup. Her tactics were bold, risky, but necessary. The radio buzzed with urgent calls and status updates. Pilots relayed enemy positions, fuel warnings, and damage reports. Sarah stayed sharp, coordinating attacks, warning of threats, and keeping the convoy moving. Time blurred in the cockpit. Smoke and fire mixed with the roar of engines and the sharp crackle of gunfire. Sarah's mind was laser-focused on one goal: keep everyone alive. After what felt like an eternity, the enemy began to pull back. The convoy had survived another deadly ambush. The pilots' voices over the radio were quieter now, relief seeping through exhaustion. Back on base, Sarah climbed out of her jet, muscles trembling but spirit strong. Her fellow pilots gathered around her, faces alight with gratitude and respect. The label of backup pilot was gone forever. She was their leader, the woman who had stared death in the face and led them through. That night, Sarah sat alone looking up at the stars. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. She had found her place, not just in the cockpit, but in the heart of the squadron. And no matter what came next, she knew she would face it head-on. The base was alive with quiet activity as dawn broke over the rugged landscape. The squadron moved with a focused energy, checking equipment, reviewing maps, preparing for what everyone knew would be their most challenging mission yet. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood apart for a moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like never before. She wasn't just leading flights anymore. She was carrying the hopes of every pilot, every soldier depending on the supply lines she was sworn to protect. The intelligence was clear. The enemy had become desperate. Reports indicated they were planning a massive offensive aimed at cutting the convoy's route permanently. If the supply chain failed, it would be a catastrophic blow to their forces. Sarah knew that this mission wasn't just about survival. It was about changing the course of the entire conflict. As the jets roared to life, Sarah climbed into her cockpit, her heart steady, but her mind sharp. The squadron took off, slicing through low-hanging clouds that mirrored the uncertainty ahead. The convoy moved slowly below, a fragile thread weaving through hostile territory. Sarah's eyes scanned the terrain, every ridge, every valley a potential threat. The radio crackled with reports of enemy activity ahead. Without warning, the sky erupted with violence. Missiles screamed past, explosions shaking the ground. Enemy fighters darted from hidden positions, striking with a fury that seemed almost reckless. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos with calm authority. Form up tight. Protect the convoy's front and rear. Watch for ground fire. The squadron responded instantly, moving as one. Sarah led from the front, weaving through enemy fire with calculated precision. Her mind was a whirlwind of tactics and decisions, each choice a matter of life and death. The enemy was relentless, fast, coordinated, and determined to break through. Amid the fury, Sarah noticed a small group of fighters trying to flank the convoy's rear. Without hesitation, she veered off course, intercepting them head-on. The sky became a deadly dance of speed and firepower. Sarah's hands moved instinctively, firing bursts to force the attackers away. The fight was brutal, and every second felt stretched thin, but she held her ground. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the convoy. One of the fuel trucks erupted in flames, sending a towering plume of smoke into the sky. Sarah's stomach tightened, but she refused to lose focus. "Emergency teams, prepare for immediate response," she ordered calmly over the radio. "Keep the convoy moving." The enemy pressed harder, sensing their advantage. Sarah's squadron was outnumbered, but her leadership held firm. "Stay close. Cover each other. We'll get through this." Her words carried strength and reassurance, binding the pilots together. The battle dragged on, the sky a chaotic blur of jets and tracer fire. Sarah's mind raced, constantly adjusting strategies to counter the enemy's moves. She coordinated air support, directed pilots to critical positions, and stayed alert for any sign of a new threat. Then came a moment of sharp danger. A missile locked onto Sarah's jet. Alarms blared as she executed a daring evasive maneuver, narrowly escaping destruction. The squadron covered her retreat, forming a protective barrier. Every pilot pushed to their limits, fighting not just for the mission, but for each other. Slowly, the enemy's assault began to falter. Their fighters broke formation, retreating into the shadows from which they had come. The convoy, battered but alive, continued its journey. Relief swept through the squadron. Voices over the radio filled with gratitude and exhaustion. Back on base, the mood was different now. Quiet pride mixed with the raw edge of survival. Sarah climbed from her jet, muscles aching but spirit unbroken. Around her, the pilots gathered, their eyes reflecting respect and trust. She was no longer the backup. She was their leader, the woman who had stared down disaster and pulled them through. Later that night, alone in the dim glow of the hangar, Sarah allowed herself a moment to reflect. The mission was far from over, and the road ahead would be long and dangerous. But she had found something powerful: confidence, purpose, and the unbreakable bond of those who fly together. No matter what came next, she was ready to face it head-on. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over the base. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood silently, watching the horizon as the sky faded from gold to deep blue. The weight of the past missions pressed on her, but so did a quiet sense of accomplishment. What had begun as a simple assignment as a backup pilot had evolved into something far greater. She had earned her place among the squadron, not through words, but through courage and resolve. The final mission was unlike any before. Intelligence had revealed that the enemy was planning one last desperate attempt to cut off the supply convoy permanently. This was not just another skirmish. It was a battle that could change the course of the war. Sarah knew every decision she made would be critical. As the squadron prepared, she gathered the pilots. Their faces showed fatigue, but also determination. Sarah looked each of them in the eyes and said, "We've come through every test so far because we fly together. Today, we hold the line. No matter what happens, we protect each other and the convoy." Her voice was steady, filled with the quiet strength they all needed to hear. The jets roared to life and lifted into the darkening sky. The convoy moved below, a lifeline threading through dangerous territory. The tension was thick. Everyone knew the enemy's desperation meant they would be relentless. Sarah's hands gripped the controls, eyes scanning every movement on the radar. Suddenly, the night sky exploded with fire. Missiles lit up the darkness like deadly shooting stars. Enemy fighters surged forward in waves, their attacks coordinated and fierce. The squadron dove into action. Sarah's voice came over the radio, sharp and clear. "Stay sharp. Protect the convoy's flanks. Watch your six. We hold the line here." The battle was brutal. Jets twisted and turned, engines screaming as they dodged missiles and gunfire. Sarah weaved through the chaos, her mind racing faster than her jet. The enemy was more aggressive than ever, using new tactics to try and break their defense. In the midst of the battle, a call came through. One of the convoy's trucks was hit and burning fiercely. Sarah's stomach clenched, but she stayed focused. "Emergency teams, prepare to move in as soon as the area is clear. Keep the convoy moving forward." Every second mattered. Enemy fighters targeted Sarah directly, trying to break her formation. A missile locked onto her plane, alarms blaring. She pulled every ounce of skill and training to evade the strike, narrowly escaping a fatal blow. Her squadron quickly formed a shield, protecting her as she regained control. The fight seemed endless. Pilots called out warnings, repositioned, and pushed back with everything they had. Sarah coordinated attacks, directing fire toward the most dangerous threats. The convoy moved steadily, though the road was scarred with the damage of battle. Then, the tide turned. The enemy fighters began to falter, their formations breaking apart under the squadron's relentless defense. One by one, they retreated into the night, defeated but dangerous. As the last fighter disappeared over the horizon, Sarah breathed a quiet sigh of relief. The convoy was safe, for now. The pilots radioed in, voices heavy with exhaustion, but alive with the triumph of survival. Back on base, the air was thick with emotion. The squadron gathered, some hugging, others silent, all changed by what they had endured. Sarah stepped out of her jet, her body tired, but her spirit fierce. Around her, the pilots no longer saw the backup pilot. They saw their leader, their protector. Captain Reynolds approached, clapping her on the shoulder. "You did more than turn the tide, Sarah. You carried us through the storm." The words felt heavy and real, a validation that she had earned. That night, as the base settled into quiet, Sarah stood under a sky bursting with stars. The battles were far from over, but she had proven herself not just to her squadron, but to herself. She was no longer waiting in the shadows. She was the pilot who turned the tide. And this was only the beginning.